The Harvest Moon Festival burned bright enough to make my eyes water as I stepped into the square. But it was pride, not smoke, that held my chin high. Torches licked at the night, drums pounded, couples spun in circles, and I walked in alone, still bleeding from Jonathan's rejection. An Omega from Thornwick is easy to overlook. A Baron Omega is something to pity. I was done being pitied. Then I saw him. Jonathan, hand clamped around the waist of his new mate. Laughter smug, eyes flicking over me like I was a forgotten mistake. Shame hit first, then fury, hot and clean. I refused to let him think he'd ruined me. The crowd shifted, and that was when I saw the stranger. Taller than any man around him, dark hair brushing his shoulders, armor black and silver, carved in the shape of wolves and battlefields. Power rolled off him in quiet waves, his blue gaze sweeping the festival like he owned it. I didn't care who he was. I just moved. One breath, 2 steps, my fingers fisting in his armor as I dragged him down and crushed my mouth to his. The world shattered into lightning. Heat, sparks, a pull in my chest like something ancient waking up. His hands locked around my waist, steady, claiming, and every wolf in the square went silent. Later, they would whisper that I kissed the Alpha King in front of his entire kingdom. In that moment, all I knew was this: Jonathan wasn't the man who would decide my worth. The stranger under my hands would. The market the next morning smelled of river mud and fresh bread, of damp wool cloaks and crushed herbs under hurried feet. Stalls jammed the square, canvas flapping, merchants shouting over one another as if their voices alone could drag coins from purses. I kept my hood up and my basket close, pretending I didn't feel the eyes that followed me, the whispers that clung like burrs. Omega, rejected, barren. Last night's kiss had flown through Thornwick faster than smoke on a winter wind. I told myself it didn't matter, let them talk. I had survived worse than gossip. Still, I chose the furthest stall, the one near the well where old Mara sold onions and cheap salt. She had bad ears and worse eyesight. Perfect. I was reaching for a bundle of sage when the air shifted. It was subtle, like the way the forest goes quiet before a storm, but every wolf in me went still. "Good morning." The voice rolled over my skin, low and rough, threaded with a command I felt in my bones. I didn't want to look. I looked anyway. He stood on the other side of Mara's stall, as out of place among the crooked booths and muddy boots as a blade in a pile of spoons. No armor today. A dark tunic stretched across his chest, leather bracers wrapped his forearms, and his long hair was tied back at his nape, tamed but not truly controlled. Power coiled around him, invisible yet unmistakable. People parted without realizing, giving him space, bowing their heads without knowing why. The stranger from the festival. My mouth went dry. Up close, he was worse. Stronger jaw, sharper cheekbones, faint scars at his throat, like claw marks half-healed. His eyes were the same, though, ice blue and too awake, as if he never truly slept. I clutched the sage so tightly the stalk snapped. "You're following me," I said, because courage is easier when wrapped in sarcasm. A corner of his mouth tilted, not quite a smile. "You kissed me in front of half the kingdom. It seemed fair to introduce myself." My heart thudded painfully. "I don't need your name." He stepped around the stall, close enough that I had to tip my head back to meet his gaze. The noise of the market seemed to fall away, dulled to a distant roar. The wolf inside me leaned forward, nose lifted, greedy for his scent. Steel, pine, and something older, like cold stone under moonlight. "Perhaps not," he said quietly. "But you deserve it." Mara suddenly remembered she had a cart to rearrange and hobbled away, leaving us alone with our tension and the scent of onions. "I am Roland," he said, "Alpha of the High Pack, king of these lands." The world narrowed to the sound of my own pulse. I laughed, a short broken sound. "No, you're not." His gaze didn't waver. "You'd prefer I were lying." Images crashed into my mind. Stories whispered around hearth fires. of the Alpha King who bled on battlefields and held the line against rogues and rival packs, of a crown forged in silver and bone, of a throne built on old promises and older magic. I remembered the way every head had turned toward him last night, the way the music had faltered for half a heartbeat when his boots hit the stones. I remembered how it felt when I kissed him, and the bond inside me sparked like struck flint. My knees went weak. "Why are you here?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Kings don't lurk around village markets." "I didn't lurk." He glanced at the crooked stalls, at the gawking faces hastily turning away. "I searched. There's a difference." His honesty disarmed me more than any charm would have. "You should go back to your castle," I said. "Whatever happened last night was a mistake." He studied me for a long moment. Did it feel like a mistake? Heat shot up my neck. I hated him a little for asking, hated myself more for the way my body remembered the press of his mouth, the way the world had gone silent when his hands caught my waist. I swallowed. "It felt necessary," I said. "There's a difference." "Necessary for what?" I shifted my basket to my other arm, the wicker biting into my palm. "Let's call it petty revenge." His eyes flicked past me, toward the center of the market. I knew before I turned what he saw. Jonathan, at a stall of polished knives, his new mate clutching his arm like she owned every part of him I'd once dreamed was mine. Jonathan's gaze snagged on Roland, slipped to me, and narrowed. Understanding moved over Roland's face, slow and sure. "I see," he murmured. "Good," I said. "Then you can leave." "No." The word was simple, final. Every wolf within earshot stiffened. Heads bowed. My own instincts screamed at me to drop my eyes, bare my throat. I forced myself to do neither. "This isn't your concern," I said through my teeth. "Oh, but it is," he answered softly. "You made it so when you kissed me in front of my subjects. And when the bond answered." That last word hung between us. Bond. "I don't know what you think you felt." "You're Omega," he cut in, not unkindly. "You sense what I sense. Don't insult yourself by pretending otherwise." I hated that he was right. I hated the way my wolf paced under my skin whenever he looked at me. But hatred didn't erase truth. "What do you want, Your Majesty?" I asked, the title sour on my tongue. He glanced once more at Jonathan, then back at me. His gaze sharpened, decisions clicking into place behind his eyes. "There is an ancient decree," he said. "At the next blood moon, I must stand before the council with my mate at my side, or forfeit the throne. Damien is eager for me to fail." Damien. The name itself tasted like iron. "So you need a woman," I said flatly. "Any woman." "I need a mate," he corrected, "or the council will declare me unfit to rule. Damien will seize the crown, and this kingdom will drown in his hunger for power." "And where do I fit into this tragic tale?" I asked. He held my gaze like a challenge. "Last night, the entire festival saw you kiss me. They saw my hands on you. They felt the bond flare, even if they don't have words for it. Rumors are already racing ahead of us. My advisors will hear them by sundown. I can either deny what happened or use it." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "Use it how?" "A courtship," he said. "False at first. You will come to the capital with me. We will allow the kingdom to believe you are my chosen mate. It will appease the council, slow Damien's maneuvering, and buy me time." "And what do I get?" My voice cracked. "Aside from being paraded like a trophy?" His jaw tightened. "Jonathan will not dare sneer at the mate of his king. No one will whisper barren where I can hear it, and keep their tongue. You will have protection, coin, and time to decide what you want from your future. You will not be trapped. If, before the blood moon, you choose to walk away, I will let you go and bear the consequences myself." The offer glittered like a knife. To silence Jonathan, to stand above the pitying looks, to breathe for a while without wondering how I would survive winter alone. But pretending? stepping into the story of a king who needed a mate, when my heart was already cracked and bleeding. The risk tasted like ash. "I hate lies," I said quietly. "I won't play the docile queen for your counsel. I won't smile and curtsy while they weigh my womb and my bloodline like grain." His expression softened, the edges of his power folding back for a moment. "Good. I have no use for a docile queen, and I will not allow anyone to measure you like breeding stock, not while you stand beside me." I looked past him to Jonathan. He was still watching, confusion warring with unease. For the first time since he rejected me, something like fear flickered in his eyes. My heart thumped once, heavy and decisive. "Boundaries," I said. "If I agree, there will be rules. You don't touch me unless I say so. You don't make promises you can't keep. And when your decree is satisfied, if I decide this life isn't mine, you let me walk away with my head high and my name clean." Roland nodded without hesitation. "Done." "You agree too easily," I said. "That is because I am not lying." His gaze didn't flinch. "Come with me, Aveline. Let the world think I've found my mate. Let Jonathan see what he threw away. And let Damien learn that I am not as cornered as he believes." The wolf inside me pressed against my ribs, aching toward him. I had every reason to say no. Every scar on my heart screamed at me to run. Instead, I heard myself whisper, "All right?" His shoulders eased, just a fraction, as if a weight he'd carried alone for years shifted. "Then pack what you need," he said. "We ride at dusk." As he turned away, the market parted before him like wheat before a scythe. Jonathan stared after us, pale and shaken. For the first time since he shattered our bond, my chest didn't feel hollow. This might destroy me, I thought. But for once, destruction would be by my choice. The castle rose out of the mist like something pulled from an old prayer. Stone towers spearing the sky, banners snapping in the wind, wolves stitched in silver thread watching everything. By the time we passed beneath the portcullis, my lungs felt too small for my chest. I'd told myself all morning that I was ready for this, that an Omega from Thornwick could walk beside a king without flinching. Then the great hall doors opened, and 100 eyes turned toward me at once. The hall was carved from dark stone, lit by chandeliers heavy with candles and iron. Long tables stretched down either side, nobles already seated, goblets raised halfway to their mouths as they stared. Every color of the high packs was there. Blues, reds, greens, stitched onto velvet and brocade, but all of it blurred at the edges of my vision. The only thing in sharp focus was Roland's hand at the small of my back, steady and warm through the fabric of my dress. "The court has teeth," he had warned me in the courtyard, before the herald shouted his name. "They bite hardest when they smell fear." "Good," I'd replied, fingers trembling around my skirts. "I bite back." Now, as whispers crackled like dry leaves, I wondered how much of that bravado would survive the night. "Announcing His Majesty, Alpha King Roland of the High Pack," the herald boomed, his staff striking stone, "and his honored companion, Lady Aveline of Thornwick." Companion, not mate, not yet. The word slid through the hall like spilled oil anyway. Roland moved with the easy grace of a predator, each step measured but unhurried. I walked half a pace behind, reminding myself not to stare at the vaulted ceiling or the painted saints and howling wolves watching from stained glass. My wolf bristled at the attention, but something else inside me unfurled at the way the crowd parted automatically before us. For once, I wasn't the one making way. Others moved aside for me. "Is that her?" "An Omega, they say." She kissed him, in public. Perhaps the king has finally lost his wits. Their voices tried to crawl under my skin. I kept my chin level and my gaze fixed forward, the way Roland had told me. "If you must look at someone," he'd said, "look at me. I'm less likely to judge you than they are." He reached the high table and finally glanced down at me, offering his hand openly, as if he'd forgotten an entire hall of nobles existed. "Aveline," Just my name, but the word was a tether. I slipped my fingers into his. His thumb brushed the inside of my wrist once, a touch so small no one else would see it. My wolf went quiet, pressing against the bond like a palm against a closed door. We sat. Wine was poured. Plates arrived, heavy with roasted venison, dark bread, late summer berries gleaming like spilled jewels. I heard nothing of the first toasts. My ears rang with my own heartbeat until a voice cut through, calm and precise. "You're frightening the poor girl, Your Majesty." Roland's closest advisor, I guessed. The man to his right had hair going silver at the temples and eyes as sharp as hawks. He studied me without pretending not to. "I've done nothing," Roland said. "That is the problem," the advisor replied. "You forget the weight of your attention." Roland's mouth twitched. "Aveline, this is Lord Corin. He has been with me since before the crown. Since before you stopped throwing yourself at every battle line to impress your father," Corin said dryly. I should have been terrified. Instead, the familiarity between them soothed something tense in my chest. "It's an honor, my lord," I managed. "The honor is mine, Lady Aveline," Corin said, and there was no mockery in the way he dipped his head. "Anyone who can make this one smile in public deserves a title of her own." I blinked. "Smile?" Corin arched a brow at Roland. "See? She didn't even notice." Roland shot him a look that might have withered a lesser man. Corin only sipped his wine, satisfied. I turned, really studying Roland for the first time since we'd entered. The hardness was still there, the battle lines carved into his brow, the weight of decisions in his shoulders, but there was a softness at the corners of his mouth I hadn't seen before. It felt like being the only one who knew the king had a secret. Warmth uncoiled in my belly, unexpected and dangerous. Conversation flowed around us, the hall slowly forgetting to stare. Nobles came to offer the king respect, and each time, Roland introduced me first. "Lady Aveline of Thornwick," he would say. "She's under my protection." The words were casual, spoken like fact, but they built a wall around me, stone by invisible stone. Wolves who had looked at me with thinly veiled curiosity switched to careful politeness. During a lull, Roland leaned closer, his voice pitched low for my ears alone. "You're doing well." "I haven't dropped anything or fled screaming," I murmured back. "The bar is low, Your Majesty." His chest shook with a quiet laugh. A laugh. No court performance, no charming mask, just a brief, genuine sound that made Corin glance over sharply, as if he'd heard something rare and valuable break free. Later, when the plates were cleared, we moved to the council chamber. Smaller than the hall, but somehow more suffocating. The air smelled of ink and aged wood, and the round table in the center was scarred with the ghosts of old arguments. Damien was already there. I knew it was him the way I had known Roland at the festival, not by his clothes or his rank, but by the way the air changed. He was handsome in the polished way of men who have never bled in the mud. Golden hair carefully tied back, a red cloak thrown just so over one shoulder, smile sharp as a dagger. "Cousin," he said, rising, "you've brought company." Roland's hand found the small of my back again, anchor and warning both. "This is Lady Aveline." Damien's gaze slid over me, assessing, lingering a fraction too long. My skin crawled. "An Omega," he said pleasantly. "How unexpected." "Unexpected does not mean unworthy," Roland replied, steel under silk. "Of course not." Damien's eyes flicked between us, weighing, measuring. "Forgive me, my lady. We are simply surprised to see His Majesty finally choose a companion. He has been reluctant." "That is because I prefer honesty to flattery," I said before I could stop myself. Corin's head snapped toward me. Damien's smile faltered. Roland's fingers pressed lightly against my back, not in chastisement, but in quiet approval. "A rare trait here," he said. "All the more reason to value it." The council dragged on. Talk of border raids, grain stores, Minor disputes blown large by noble pride. I spoke little, but I watched the way Roland's jaw tightened when lesser alphas argued over territory like children. Watched the way his gaze softened when I leaned in to murmur a suggestion, taking my words seriously even when I doubted them. When one lord complained loudly that rogues were attacking his caravans and the king had done nothing, Roland's temper finally sparked. "I sent men twice," he said. "They found nothing. Perhaps if your guards spent less time bullying villagers and more time patrolling, you'd see results." The lord flushed, sputtering. "You accuse—" "I suggest," Roland cut in. "If I meant to accuse, you would be on your knees." His power rolled across the chamber, making the torches gutter. The lord went pale. My wolf shivered, not with fear, but with a fierce, unexpected pride. Later, when the man stormed out, muttering insults, I touched Roland's wrist under the table. "You didn't have to defend them," I said softly. "The villagers, the ones he bullies." "Yes, I did." He studied my face, searching for something. "You care for your people, Aveline. I see it every time you flinch at these stories. A king should care at least as much as an Omega from Thornwick." My throat tightened. No one had ever made that kind of comparison, and meant it as praise. By the end of the night, my head throbbed and my feet ached, but something had shifted. The court still whispered, but the tone had changed. Less derision, more curiosity. The mysterious Omega who kissed the king now had a name, a village, a voice that didn't tremble when she spoke. As we left the council chamber, Corin fell into step beside us. "You know they're terrified, don't you?" he said quietly. "Of Damien?" I asked. "Of her," he replied, nodding toward me. "They don't understand how someone can stand at your side and make you look human." Roland glanced at me then, and the look in his eyes was not the cold calculation of a ruler, but something warmer, unguarded. "Good," he said. "Let them be afraid of the idea that I might finally care about something they can't control." That night, alone in the chamber they'd given me, I lay awake staring at the carved beams overhead. The castle hummed softly around me. Distant footsteps, the whisper of wind through arrow slits, the heartbeat of an ancient place. Somewhere in the warren of rooms and corridors, the Alpha King slept, or pretended to. I pressed my palm to my chest, feeling the faint answering tug along the bond. The kingdom had seen us together today, and the ripples were already spreading. I was still just an Omega from Thornwick. But for the first time, the court had seen a king smile and mean it. The council chamber emptied like a punctured wineskin, nobles spilling out in tight little clusters, their whispers clinging to the stone. Damien's last words still hung in the air, slick and poisonous, questions about my worth, my blood, my place at Roland's side. By the time the doors closed behind the final lord, my hands were fists inside my sleeves. Roland stood at the far end of the table, head bowed, fingers pressed to the edge of the scarred wood. The torches cast his shadow long and sharp, turning him into something carved rather than living. For a moment, I wondered if he'd forgotten I was still there. "Come," he said at last, voice rougher than I'd ever heard it. "I need air." I followed him through a side door, down a narrow stair that curled like a spine. The castle's noise faded to a muted hum. When we stepped out into the gardens, the night wrapped around us, cool, quiet, smelling of damp earth and crushed roses. Moonlight silvered the gravel paths and turned the leaves into pale coins. No guards trailed us, no advisors, just the two of us and the distant rush of the river below the cliffs. "I thought kings didn't get to need anything," I said softly. He snorted, bitter and amused at once. "They don't, not where anyone can see." We walked beneath an arch of climbing roses, the petals bruised by the wind. My shoulders had been tight since Damien's attack in the council. His oily compliments, his calculated questions about an Omega's place on a throne. The way he'd lingered over the word Baron without quite saying it. "You shouldn't have let him speak to you like that," I muttered. Damien? Roland glanced at me. If I silenced every fool who tried to dig under my skin, the council chamber would be empty. I wasn't talking about you, I said. I meant me. He stopped. The gravel crunched under my boots as I took one more step before realizing he'd halted. When I turned, the moon caught his face, throwing half of it into darkness. His eyes, though, were very clear. You think I let him? He asked quietly. You didn't stop him, I said. He wanted to make me small, to remind everyone I don't belong here. He nearly succeeded. His jaw flexed once. I didn't stop him in the chamber, because if I'd unleashed my temper there, I would have ripped his throat out in front of half the kingdom. His voice dropped, edged with something feral. And then you'd be standing in a river of blood, thinking you'd tethered yourself to a monster. My breath caught. The garden suddenly felt very still. Roland. He turned away before I could finish, striding toward a stone bench shadowed by an ancient oak. For a heartbeat, he looked less like a king and more like a man who'd carried something heavy for too long. I followed, the bond tugging at me like a thread. He sank onto the bench, elbows braced on his knees, hands clasped. I hesitated, then sat beside him, leaving a sliver of space between us where our sleeves almost touched. When I was a boy, he said, staring at the gravel, I thought being king would mean freedom. You grow up hearing the songs, how the alpha's word is law, how the world bends around his decisions. You imagine a crown as a key that unlocks every door. And? I asked. And it's a shackle. His mouth twisted. Every choice I make ties someone else tighter. Every mistake I make costs more than my own skin. I walk into a room, and people stop being themselves. They become what they think I want to see. He huffed out a breath. Damien smiles like a devoted cousin while plotting how best to slide a knife between my ribs. You're surrounded, I said, but alone. He went very still, as if the words had struck something tender. When he looked at me, the usual iron in his gaze had melted, leaving something strangely defenseless. Yes, he said simply. We sat in silence for a moment. Owls called from the trees, their cries long and low. Somewhere farther off, a dog barked, was answered, then quieted. You don't help, he added softer. I blinked. I beg your pardon. You look at me, he said, and you don't see a crown first. It's disorienting. How awful for you, I said dryly, but my chest tightened. I didn't say I disliked it, he replied. Just that I don't remember how to stand still under that kind of gaze. No one had ever accused me of making a king uncomfortable simply by existing. We let the silence stretch again, not as sharp this time. The moon climbed higher, tracing silver lines along his cheekbone, the scars at his throat, the strong curve of his hands. You said Damien almost succeeded, he prompted, in making you feel small. I swallowed. The words I'd been holding back since the council rose like bile. I am small, I said. That's the point. His head snapped toward me. No. Yes. My laugh came out brittle. I grew up being reminded of it. Omegas bend. We soothe tempers, ease tensions, make ourselves soft so others can lean. We're treasured for our calm, our warmth, our wombs. I stared at the dark line of the hedge. Take one of those away, and suddenly you're not worth much at all. I felt his attention sharpen, focusing, the way it did in council when something important was said. It made my skin prickle. Is that what Jonathan told you? He asked. Jonathan didn't need to say it, I answered. He showed me. The moment he learned I couldn't give him pups, he broke our bond like it was a rotten rope, found a new she-wolf with hips made for breeding, and a family eager to tie themselves to his ambition. My throat burned. No one said barren to my face. They didn't have to. They said it with their pity, with the way they stopped including me in plans, with the way they watched my stomach, as if it owed them something. Roland's hands had curled into fists. The tendons stood out stark against his skin, so when Damien looks at me, I went on quieter, I know exactly what he sees. An omega without the one thing the world thinks makes me valuable, a weak point at your side. Aveline, he said, my name roughened. You are many things. Weak point isn't one of them. You can't know that, I whispered. We barely know each other. He was silent for a long time. I wondered if I'd pushed too far. Then he exhaled, a sound as tired as it was controlled. I know what it is to be measured for parts, he said. Strength, ferocity, usefulness. I was my father's sword long before I was his son. He loved me best when I bled for him. He stared at his hands. When I stopped needing his approval, he started talking about heirs instead, as if the only legacy that mattered was the next body he could shape into a blade. Something inside me cracked at the picture. Roland younger, throwing himself at battles just to earn a nod. Did he ever see you? I asked. Sometimes, he said. On rare nights, when the wine was low and the fire was quiet. Then he'd tell me stories of the first Alpha King and look at me like I might be something more than a weapon. His mouth tightened. He usually forgot by morning. I turned on the bench so I could see his face. You stopped trying. Yes. A faint, humorless smile. I decided if no one would see the man under the crown, I'd bury him deep and become what they needed. A blade, a wall, a symbol that wouldn't crack. His gaze flicked to mine. And then you walked into a festival, kissed me like you didn't care if I shattered, and looked at me as if I was just a man who'd surprised you. Heat climbed my throat. I was angry, I said quickly. At Jonathan. At myself. I know. He studied me, as if weighing how much more truth I could bear. But for the space of a heartbeat, you didn't want a king or a legend. You wanted a stranger who might help you hurt the man who hurt you, and when the bond answered, he trailed off, jaw working. What did you feel? I asked, before I could stop myself. His eyes met mine, and the world shrank to silver and shadow, and the sound of our breathing. Relief, he said, and terror, because for the first time, I thought the stories might be right. That somewhere the moon had carved a piece out of me and given it a name. Aveline. My lungs forgot how to work. You give me too much credit, I said weakly. I don't give you enough. His voice was steadier now. You talk about yourself as if you're broken, as if one part of you failed and the rest must follow. But when you spoke in council today, every man at that table listened, even if they pretended otherwise. You cut through the pride and the performance. You make me consider the cost of my choices on people who will never see this garden. That's just common sense, I said. No, he replied. It's compassion, and I have ruled so long surrounded by wolves who see compassion as a weakness that I'd almost forgotten what it looks like. The night wrapped around us, thick and soft. My eyes stung. No one had ever spoken about me like that. Not as a vessel, not as a burden, but as something that changed the shape of a room simply by standing in it. I don't know how to be what you need, I admitted. I don't know how to be a queen, or a symbol, or whatever they expect beside you. I only know how to be this. A woman whose body failed at the one thing it was supposed to do, trying very hard not to crumble. His hand shifted on the bench, knuckles brushing mine. It was barely a touch, but the bond flared warm, steady. Then be that, he said. Be exactly who you are. Let them learn a queen can be built from honesty and scars instead of perfection. He hesitated, then added, almost shyly, I would rather stand with a woman who knows her own broken edges than with a flawless lie chosen for me. I turned my hand over, letting my fingers slide against his. His grasp closed around mine, careful, as if he held something precious that might bolt or break. You're lonely, I said. So are you, he answered. We sat there, two people the world expected to be unshakable, holding on to each other like a shared confession. For the first time, the walls between King and Omega, between weapon and wasteland, between duty and damage, thinned enough for us to see through. The crown was still his burden. My barrenness was still my wound. The world had not changed. But under the moon, in the quiet breath, between one heartbeat and the next, we did. The lines started to blur on a day that should have been forgettable. The great hall buzzed with lords arguing over grain and coin, the kind of quarrels that turned hours to dust. I stood beside Roland near the dais, hands folded, thoughts drifting to the garden, and the way his voice had sounded under the moon when he admitted he was lonely. A messenger burst in, cloak muddy, face pale. He stumbled to his knees. "Rogues on the East Road, Your Majesty. 3 caravans and 3 nights." The hall exploded. Questions, accusations, everyone trying to outshout the others. The boy flinched, shoulders curling in on themselves. I stepped down from the dais without thinking, placing myself between him and the worst of the shouting. Gravel would have felt kinder than those voices. Roland moved with me. His hand found mine, and closed around it, calm and sure, like we'd done this 1,000 times. Silence rippled outward. A few nobles stared openly at our joined hands before remembering their manners. Heat climbed my neck. I should have pulled away. Instead, my fingers curled tighter around his. "Enough," Roland said, voice low but carrying. "You will address your king, not tear apart his messenger." The shouting withered to mutters. He questioned the boy, steady and precise, and all the while his thumb traced small circles against my skin. By the time he let go, my palm felt strangely bare. The rest of the day kept knocking at the lines we'd drawn. In the corridor, he guided me past a knot of visiting warriors, hand at the small of my back, body subtly angled so they'd have to go through him to reach me. In the training yard, when a spear swung a little too wide, he was suddenly between me and the weapon, shoulders tense, a warning growl under his breath. "I wasn't in danger," I said afterward. "You were close enough," he replied, as if that settled it. I told myself it was for the sake of the performance. A king in love made for a convincing story. A protective alpha soothed the council's doubts. Then came the dinner with the southern packs. A lady in crimson leaned over his arm, laughing too loudly, pressing her painted mouth closer with every joke. Her finger slid along the leather of his sleeve, lingering like a promise. The bond tightened in my chest, sharp and hot. For a heartbeat, I saw myself reaching across the table and breaking her hand. Roland's gaze flicked to me. Whatever polite smile he'd been wearing vanished. He gently lifted her hand from his arm and placed it back on the table. "My apologies, my lady," he said. "My arm is already claimed." His eyes never left mine. Later, in the corridor, I hissed, "You are very dedicated to this role." "If this were only a role," he said, "you wouldn't have looked ready to start a war over a sleeve." "I did not. Aveline." He softened my name. "I feel it too." We let that truth hang there a moment, then stepped around it like it was a sleeping beast. The castle adjusted faster than either of us did. Servants began setting 2 cups on his desk without being asked. Guards dipped their heads to me, the way they did to ranked alphas, out of habit rather than obligation. In the kitchens, I overheard a scullion say, "The king eats more when she's there," as if that were the most natural measure of my importance. Some evenings, I found myself outside his door with no memory of the walk. My knuckles hovered over the wood, while my heart tried to hammer its way out of my ribs. Half the time, I forced myself to turn away. The other half, I knocked. He always looked up quickly when I entered, as if he'd been listening for me. "Long day?" I would ask. "Shorter now," he'd say, and there was nothing royal about the way he said it. We talked of ordinary things, weather on the borders, which staircase creaked the loudest, why the 3rd-floor corridor smelled faintly of onions. Somewhere between the jokes and the shared bread, I realized I was memorizing him, the way he dragged his hand through his hair when frustrated, the way his shoulders eased when I laughed. One night, as we left his solar, he caught his boot on a loose stone. He stumbled, grabbing my elbow. "Careful, Your Majesty," I said. "Imagine the ballads if the great Alpha King is slain by a misplaced rock." "A rock laid by my ancestors," he said solemnly. "It would be death by legacy. Poets would be insufferable." I snorted. His surprise lasted one heartbeat. Then he laughed with me, the sound rich and unguarded. It bounced off the stone walls and startled a passing servant so badly he nearly dropped his candles. The bond hummed after that, closer to the surface, as if it had heard him and approved. I started noticing his absence like a missing tooth. If he left before dawn, the castle felt off balance until I sensed him return, that faint easing somewhere under my ribs. In crowded rooms, my gaze found him first, even when I pretended to be studying tapestries. My wolf tracked his scent without asking permission. We never spoke of it. The arrangement stayed our shield, the story we told everyone else and ourselves, but there were tiny betrayals everywhere. His hand finding mine before he thought about who might see. My feet taking the path to his study when I meant to go to the library. The way conversations in council shifted, almost unconsciously, to include my opinion, because the king had started looking to me before he decided. At night, in my chamber, I lay in the dark and counted heartbeats until the tension in the bond eased, telling me he'd finally fallen asleep somewhere beyond the wall. It was a ridiculous comfort. I clung to it anyway. Once, half dream-dazed, I whispered into the darkness. This was supposed to be pretend. The bond thrummed in answer, warm and stubborn, as if to say, not to me. The lines we had drawn so carefully, between duty and desire, between performance and truth, were still there on the surface, inked in bold strokes for anyone watching. Underneath, where the moonlight didn't reach, they were already smudging. The castle always felt too bright after a banquet, all gold and chatter and clinking goblets. His private chambers were the opposite, warm, dim, lit by a handful of candles and the orange glow of the hearth. When Roland pushed the door shut behind us, the sudden quiet wrapped around my shoulders like a cloak. "Sit," he said, shrugging out of his formal cloak. The heavy fur slid from his shoulders, leaving him in a dark tunic that clung to muscle instead of ceremony. "You've spent 3 hours listening to men argue over who sits closest to the salt. You deserve a chair that doesn't wobble." "I thought queens in training slept on stone to harden their spines," I said, but I sank into the chair near the fire all the same. My feet throbbed in my shoes. My cheeks still ached from polite smiles. He poured wine, then hesitated, studying me. "Water instead?" "You're learning," I murmured. "Water." A faint grin tugged at his mouth as he obeyed. He handed me the cup, fingers brushing mine, and the familiar flicker along the bond rose and fell like a breath. I took a sip, letting the coolness cut through the taste of too many lies. For a while, we simply existed in the same space. He leaned one hip against the table, loosening the ties at his throat. I watched the fire chew through a log, sparks drifting up the chimney. "You handled Lord Breon well," Roland said at last. "Most people fold when he starts talking about tradition in that voice of his." "I was raised on that voice," I replied. "Different lord, same tone. Tradition usually means, I like things the way they are because they favor me." Roland huffed a soft laugh. "You're going to cause trouble." "I thought that was your specialty," I said. He tilted his head, considering. "Perhaps we'll share it." The warmth between us shifted at that. Subtle, like a change in the wind. I became aware of how close he was to my chair, of the way the firelight painted his jaw in soft shadow, of the loosened ties at his throat, revealing a triangle of skin I had absolutely no business staring at. I looked away. The room did not cool. "Did you enjoy yourself at all?" he asked. "At the banquet." "Enjoy is a strong word," I said. "I didn't die. That feels like a victory." "You did more than survive." He pushed off the table and crossed to the hearth, resting a forearm on the mantel. "When Damien implied an Omega couldn't understand matters of state, you asked him how many times he'd actually been to the border. He was so eager to debate. I thought his eyes might fall out." "I only asked a question," I said, but my lips twitched. "You asked the right question," Roland answered. It shut him up more effectively than anything I could have said. "Careful," I warned lightly. "If you praise me too often, I might start thinking I belong here." He went very still. The fire popped, filling the space between us. "You do," he said quietly. The words landed in my chest like a stone in water, heavy, then rippling outward. For a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. I covered the moment with a sip of water that did nothing to steady me. "You're biased," I managed. "At last," he murmured, "something I am content to be accused of." Silence fell again, but it wasn't the comfortable kind we'd grown used to. It was edged, bright, humming under my skin. I could feel him watching me, even when I refused to lift my gaze from the flames. "Aveline," he said. The way he spoke my name, low, almost careful, drew my eyes up despite myself. He'd moved closer. I hadn't heard him cross the room, but there he was, standing just in front of my chair, the fire at his back throwing light around him like a halo made of embers. My fingers tightened around the cup. "Yes?" My voice came out softer than I intended. "May I ask you something without you turning it into a weapon?" His mouth curved slightly. "You're very good at that." "That depends on the question," I said, but my heart had already picked up its pace. He crouched, bracing his forearms on his knees, so we were nearly eye level. Up close, the tired lines around his eyes were more obvious, but so was the warmth there. The gentleness he let few people see. The bond buzzed under my skin, not loud, just present, waiting. "Tonight," he said, "when Damien made that little speech about bloodlines and heirs." He paused, searching my face. "You looked like you wanted to leave, to run if you could." I swallowed. "I stayed." "You did." Pride flickered in his eyes. "But it cost you. I could feel it. I don't want this arrangement," he gestured vaguely, "to hurt you more than it helps." I forced a crooked smile. "You're asking that a bit late, don't you think?" "Perhaps." His voice roughened. "But ask I must." The walls I carried, the ones I'd rebuilt after Jonathan shattered them, shifted uneasily. "It stings," I said at last, "being discussed like a broodmare in front of half the kingdom, having my worth measured by a womb that doesn't work properly." I met his gaze, forcing him to see it. "But it's not new pain, Roland. You didn't invent it. You just gave me a higher room from which to hear it echo." His jaw tightened on my name. "You are more than that," he said. "More than they see, more than you allow yourself to believe." Heat pricked the backs of my eyes. I looked away quickly, blinking hard. "If you keep saying things like that, I might start to believe you." "Good," he said. "Believe me." The crackle from the hearth filled the room. My heart thudded a little too loudly in my ears. When I looked back, his eyes were darker, intent, as if he were standing on the edge of something and trying to decide whether to jump. He lifted a hand, then stopped halfway, fingers hovering near my cheek. "If you want me to step back," he said quietly, "say it." The air between us tightened. I could have. I should have. The arrangement, the decree, the risk. Every reason to keep our distance lined up in my head like soldiers. But I remembered his confession in the garden, the way his voice had broken on the word alone. I remembered my own, torn from me like a bandage, admitting how small and useless I'd felt since Jonathan. I remembered how, since then, the castle felt less like a cage and more like something we were rebuilding room by room together. I didn't step back. "I'm not fragile glass," I said, though my voice shook. "If you're going to break something, at least be certain it's worth the effort." Something like relief flashed across his face, swift and fierce. His hand completed the journey, thumb brushing the edge of my jaw, with a care that undid me more than any roughness could have. "Everything about this is dangerous," he murmured. "I'm aware," I whispered. He leaned in, slowly enough that I could have turned my head, stood, laughed it off. I did none of those things. The world shrank to the inches between us. I could see the flecks of silver in his irises, the faint scar at his lower lip. "Evelyn," he said again, like a vow this time. Then his mouth met mine. It wasn't like the first kiss, all impulse and defiance and lightning. This one was careful at first, almost hesitant, as if he feared pushing me would shatter something delicate between us. His lips were warm, his hand steady at my jaw, the other braced on the arm of the chair, boxing me in without trapping me. I sighed into him, and that tiny surrender broke whatever restraint he had left. The kiss deepened, slow but devastating. The mate bond surged, a low, rising roar in my blood. Heat unfurled from the center of my chest, rolling through limbs and bone, as if some ancient part of me had been waiting for this exact pressure, this exact taste, to fully wake. My hands moved of their own accord, clutching at his tunic, pulling him closer. He went willingly, one knee on the floor now, shoulders bowed, as if he'd kneel at my feet without shame if I asked. "This," that wild inner voice whispered, "this is what it was meant to be." When we finally broke apart, it wasn't clean. He lingered, breath mingling with mine, lips brushing the corner of my mouth once more, as if he couldn't quite let go. My heart hammered against my ribs, answering some rhythm in his chest. We stared at each other, stunned. "That," he said hoarsely, "was not part of the arrangement." "No," I agreed, my fingers still twisted in his shirt. "It wasn't." He swallowed, eyes searching my face for regret, fear, anything that might tell him to retreat. The bond hummed between us, no longer a faint thread, but a bright living cord. "This isn't pretend anymore," I heard myself say. His hand tightened at my jaw. "No," he echoed. "It never really was." And for the first time we stopped lying. To the court, to ourselves, to the bond burning quietly beneath our skin. After the second kiss, the castle felt different, as if some hidden door had been unlocked, and every corridor knew it. Servants moved with the same practiced efficiency. Guards stood at their posts. Nobles still bickered over territory and titles. But beneath it all, something in the air hummed, tuned to a note only the two of us could hear. Roland found me in the small reading room off the West Hall, where the windows looked out over fog and stone. I pretended to study a book. I hadn't turned a page in 10 minutes. My lips still felt too aware, as if his mouth had branded them. "Aveline." His voice filled the doorway. I looked up, heart stuttering. He'd left off his formal cloak, wearing only a simple dark tunic and sturdy boots, as if he were about to ride out rather than face a council. The sight of him like that, less king, more man, did strange things to my breathing. "Shouldn't you be terrifying someone important?" I asked. "I am," he said. "You, apparently." Before I could answer, he added, "Come with me. There's something I wish to show you." There was a quiet undercurrent in his tone, something fragile enough that refusing felt like stepping on glass. I closed the book and rose. "Is it another council chamber?" I asked. "Because I might throw myself from a tower." He almost smiled. "No councils, no nobles, just us." Those words fluttered under my ribs. I followed him through a side passage, past storerooms and narrow staircases, to a plain wooden door I'd never noticed. Vines crawled up the stone around it, their leaves a deep glossy green. Roland paused with his hand on the latch, suddenly uncertain. "I have not brought anyone here since she died," he said. "She?" I asked gently. "My mother." The air shifted. I straightened, instinctively careful, as if we were approaching a shrine. He opened the door. The space beyond stole my breath. It wasn't large, not compared to the grand courtyards, but it felt bigger somehow, the way a held note feels larger than the instrument that made it. A stone wall wrapped around a pocket of earth, sheltering it from the wind. Flowering bushes crowded the edges, their blooms in every shade of white and pale gold. A small tree grew near the center, its branches spreading gracefully, hung with delicate glass charms that chimed softly when the breeze passed through. "It's beautiful," I whispered. Roland let the door fall shut behind us. "She loved gardens," he said they were proof that softness could outlast steel. After she died, I had this made where no one could trample it for show. It reminds me I'm not only a sword." He walked a few steps ahead, fingers brushing a spray of blossoms the way a man might greet an old friend. I watched him, something warm and aching curling in my chest. "You come here often?" I asked. "When I cannot sleep," he admitted. "When the walls feel too narrow. When I forget why I am doing any of this and need her voice in my head, telling me to stop being a fool." A faint smile tugged at my mouth. "Sounds like a wise queen." "She was." He glanced back at me. "She would have liked you." The words landed heavier than any elaborate compliment. I stepped closer to one of the bushes, running my fingertips over the velvet petals of a pale rose. "In Thornwick," I said, "we didn't have gardens like this. The soil's too rocky, the weather too wild. My mother grew stubborn little wildflowers in cracked pots along the cottage wall. Said anything that bloomed there was proof the gods hadn't forgotten us." Roland listened with the same focus he gave battle reports. "Every week," I went on, "she'd pick one flower, press it between scraps of parchment, and write a line about that day. A joke someone told. A kindness. A thing she didn't want to forget. By winter, the book was fat and wrinkled, full of small, quiet miracles." He stepped closer, interest sharpening. "Do you still have it?" "No." I swallowed. "When she died, Jonathan said it was childish to cling to pressed weeds. He threw it in the fire while I was out fetching water." Anger flashed across Roland's face so fast it almost vibrated. "He burned your memories." "Just the ones he could see," I said lightly, though my chest hurt. "The others survived." He was silent for a beat, jaw tight. Then carefully he said, "Would you show me how you did it, with the flowers?" I blinked. "You want to learn how to press petals like some village girl with ink-stained fingers?" "I want to remember this place the way you remember your mother's pots," he said. "And I would like you to be the one who shows me how." Something in me eased, like a knot pulled gently loose. "We'll need parchment, and something heavy." He led me to a stone bench built into the wall. I tore a page from the small notebook I carried at my belt, smoothing it across my knees. He watched as I chose a single blossom from a white flower near the path, cradling it carefully. "You pick just one," I said. "Otherwise, the plant sulks." He huffed. "Is that a fact?" "It is now." I set the petal on the parchment. "You flatten it, fold the page, then press." He slid onto the bench beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed. I guided his larger hand over the folded paper, pressing it down. "And then?" he asked. "Then you wait," I said. "Days, weeks. When you open it, the flower's different, thinner, fragile. But it keeps its shape, sometimes its color. You've trapped a moment. It can't be lived again, but it can't be fully lost either." Roland stared at our joined hands. "What will you write about this one?" I hesitated, the answer rising before I could censor it. "That the king let me see the place he hides his heart," I said softly, "and that, for a little while, I forgot to be afraid." His breath caught. Slowly, he drew his hand back, as if afraid of breaking something delicate. "You make everything sound like it matters," he murmured. "It does," I replied. "Or it should." The bells chimed faintly overhead, marking the hour. The castle felt far away. The council, Damien, the decree, distant thunder instead of present storm. Here it was just flowers, stone, and the man beside me who had bared more of himself in this hidden patch of earth than in any chamber hung with banners. "My mother used to say strength isn't how hard you can strike," he said after a while. "It's who you choose to stand in front of when the blows start falling." "That sounds like her," I said. "From what I know." He looked at me then, really looked, as if comparing some memory of his mother's face with mine. Not in features, but in something quieter. "I have spent years standing in front of everyone," he said. "The packs, the borders, a council that would happily see me bleed so they never have to. It always felt like standing in front of a storm. Necessary. Endless." "And now?" I asked. His gaze drifted around the garden. The tree, the charms, the flowers we'd disturbed. Then it returned to me, softer than I'd ever seen it. "Now," he said slowly, "it feels like I finally stepped inside from the rain." The words settled over my skin like warm water. My throat tightened. "I don't know how to be a roof," I whispered. "Half the time I'm barely a wall." "You are more than you think," he answered. "When you walk into a room, I remember there is a world beyond duty. When you speak, I hear my own thoughts echoed back in a voice that isn't dripping with expectation. When you laugh—" He shook his head. "It sounds like something I lost a long time ago." Tears pricked my eyes before I could stop them. I turned my face slightly, pretending to examine a nearby bloom. "Careful, Your Majesty," I said thickly. "The kingdom will revolt if they learn their fearsome king feels things." "I am only fearsome to those who deserve it," he said. "You are not one of them." He reached out, fingers brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. The touch was light, almost absent-minded, but it sent a shiver down my spine. The bond pulsed, content, like a creature settling into its den. "Show me another," he said. So we did. We chose petals from different flowers, one for the day the council had nearly shattered me, one for the first time he'd laughed without restraint, one for the moment in his chambers when our arrangement had finally cracked open and something real spilled out. Each time we folded the parchment together, hands overlapping. Each time he asked quietly, "And what will you write?" And each time the answers came easier. As the light softened and shadows stretched, I realized how deeply the place had wrapped itself around me. The scent of earth, the steady presence at my side, the knowledge that I was sitting in the one corner of the world he had kept for himself, and that he had chosen to share it with me. For him, this garden was a memory of who he'd been before the crown. For me, it became something else entirely. It felt like something I had never had. Home. Night in the memorial garden felt different than day, like the world had been stripped down to essentials: stone, flowers, and sky. The castle lights glowed faintly through high windows, but out here the stars did most of the work, scattered thick across the dark like someone had torn open a bag of diamonds. Roland had sent the guards away with a look. They lingered at the door, then obeyed, leaving us alone with the soft chiming of the glass charms in the branches. We sat side by side on the stone bench, shoulders almost touching. A folded scrap of parchment rested between us, tonight's flower pressed inside. We hadn't written the memory yet. "You're quiet," he said at last. "Unusual, I know." His mouth twitched, but his eyes didn't lose their focus on me. "You're thinking hard enough I can almost hear it. Is it the council, Damien, the decree?" "All of it," I said. "And something worse." He shifted, turning toward me. "Worse than Damien?" "Much." "Then I am appropriately alarmed." His tone was light, his scent wasn't. Tension threaded through it. "Tell me." I stared down at my hands. The moon silvered the scars on my knuckles from a childhood spent climbing trees and falling out of them. I'd rather have hit stone again than say the words lining up in my throat. "You know what Damien thinks of me," I said. "What the council thinks. An omega without a working womb is a tragedy at best, a liability at worst. They dress it in kinder words, but that's the meaning." Roland's jaw clenched. "They are fools." "Maybe." I drew a breath that scraped my ribs. "But fools can still be right about ugly things." He started to protest. I lifted a hand, needing to finish before my courage scattered. "When Jonathan rejected our bond," I said, "it hurt, but not only because I lost him. It hurt because it confirmed every quiet fear I'd carried since the healers spoke plain. That I was less. that my future had shrunk to the size of a small room. No mate, no pups. Just me, watching other women carry the life I couldn't. My throat thickened. I told myself I'd be enough for myself, that I would build a life alone, even if it was smaller than I once imagined. The garden blurred. I blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall unchecked. Then you walked into a festival, I went on, and the bond snapped awake like it had been waiting for you. An alpha king, the one wolf in this kingdom who cannot afford to choose wrongly. I laughed once, low and bitter. The moon has a cruel sense of humor. Roland's voice came out rough. You think she made a mistake. I think she gave you the short end of the bargain, I whispered. Your kingdom expects heirs. Your council expects a queen whose belly will prove your strength. Instead, you got me, broken, empty, my fingers curled into my skirt. And I am terrified, Roland. Terrified that someday you'll wake and realize you can't afford what loving me costs you. That duty will win, and I'll watch you walk towards someone who can give you what I cannot. The words hung between us, raw and shaking. The charms in the tree clinked softly, like distant applause for finally saying the thing that had been rotting inside me. For a long moment, he didn't speak. The silence stretched thin. I almost stood, heart pounding, ready to flee the garden, the castle, the bond, anything to escape the answer forming on his tongue. Then he said very quietly, "Look at me." I did, because disobeying that voice felt impossible. His eyes were darker than the sky, reflecting starlight and something fiercer. "Do you know what I fear?" he asked. "Truly fear? It isn't losing the throne. It isn't bleeding on some forgotten field. I've been prepared for that since I could lift a sword." He shifted closer, knee brushing mine. "My fear," he said, "is that I am nothing more than metal and crown to the people who claim to want me, that without the throne, I become a smaller man. Less interesting, less desirable, less worth fighting for. I have had women look at me and see a title, a legend, a story they wish to step into. Few look long enough to see the man who cannot sleep, the son who failed his father's impossible expectations, the wolf who gets tired of being invincible." He smiled then, a thin, crooked thing. "The first time you saw me, you did not know my name. You saw a stranger and used him as a weapon to wound someone who hurt you." "That's not flattering," I muttered. "It is honest," he said. "You took what you needed. When you learned who I was, you didn't suddenly start bowing and simpering. You argued. You glared. You told me I was wrong. You were not impressed by my crown." His gaze softened. "You were impressed when I defended your villagers." Heat rose in my chest, painful and bright. "You think you are less because you cannot bear children," he went on. "I think I am less because I am rarely wanted apart from what I can provide. Power, safety, a name. We are both wrong, Aveline. The bond doesn't measure us that way. It never has." "I don't know how to ignore reality because of a feeling," I said. "Feelings don't stop the council from whispering, or Damien from circling, or the laws from demanding heirs." "No," he agreed, "but feelings decide what I can live with." He reached out, taking my hand, slow enough that I could have pulled away. I didn't. "Listen to me. The mate bond does not make mistakes. It does not consider politics or convenience. It does not care what Damien thinks, or what the council mutters, or what some dead king wrote into law to soothe his own insecurity. It cares what my wolf knows in his bones." He squeezed my fingers. "And he knows that you are his." Tears finally spilled over, hot tracks down my cheeks. "Even if it costs you your throne?" "If the throne demands I tear myself away from the one person who sees me, then the throne is not worth keeping," he said simply. "I can build a life without a crown. I cannot build one without my own soul. And make no mistake, Aveline, that is what you are to me." I stared at him, heart beating so hard it hurt. "You need heirs." "I would like children," he said. "I do not need them more than I need you, and the world is wider than blood." A faint smile touched his lips. "There are pups without parents. cousins whose lines could be strengthened, treaties that could be sealed by adoption instead of marriage. My mother used to say family is chosen as often as it is born. I am inclined to believe her. The knot in my chest loosened, not all at once, but enough that I could breathe without it scraping. You'd give up everything, I whispered, for a mate the world calls broken. I do not see you as broken, he said. I see you as a woman who survived being told she was only one thing. You are not empty, Aveline. You are overflowing, with stubbornness, with courage, with the kind of loyalty that terrifies men who have never deserved it. He lifted our joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles. And if the gods decided to intertwine my soul with yours, I am inclined to trust their judgment more than my counsels. The stars blurred again. This time, I let them. A sob broke out of me, half laugh, half wound, tearing open. I am so afraid, I admitted, of hoping, of wanting too much. His thumb stroked across my hand. I'm afraid too, he said, of trusting that someone might stay for me, not for what I can give them. But fear doesn't change what already is. The bond is there. You feel it, I feel it. We can either spend our lives pretending it's a mistake, or we can choose to believe we were not made to be halfway loved. I laughed wetly. That sounds like something your mother would have said. It is, he replied. She would also tell you that any king who measures his queen by the heirs she gives him is a fool, and unworthy of both. I wiped my cheeks with the back of my free hand, breath hitching. So what do we do? He leaned closer, resting his forehead against mine. The contact sent a warm rush through the bond, steady and sure, like the first true light before dawn. We walk forward, he murmured. Together. We fight the council if we must. We outmaneuver Damien. We build a life that makes sense to us, not to men who have never bled for anything but their pride. And when you doubt your worth, I will remind you until you're sick of hearing it. A shaky smile tugged at my mouth. You're assuming I let you. He breathed a quiet laugh, the sound brushing my lips. You already have. Under the stars, in the garden built for a queen who understood love better than law, our shared wounds lay open between us, not healed, not yet, but no longer festering in the dark. For the first time, they felt less like reasons to run, and more like the edges of something we might, together, finally mend. The blood moon crept closer, and with it, the castle's mood curdled. Whispers clung to the corridors like smoke. Servants went quiet when I entered a room. Nobles watched me with the too bright interest of carrion birds waiting to see if the creature in front of them would stand or fall. No one said the word to my face, but I heard it in every pause, every averted gaze. Baron. The rumor started in the East Wing, among minor ladies who liked to pretend they knew everything. By the time they reached the council, they had grown teeth. Damien made sure of it. I heard one version as I passed a half-open door. The healers confirmed it years ago, a man whispered. No heirs. The moon would never choose. Careful, another hissed. Walls have ears. If walls had ears, then Roland's throne had claws, and Damien was sharpening them. By the third day, I could barely breathe inside the stone. Every glance felt like a question I couldn't answer. Every corridor smelled of doubt. Damien didn't need to confront me directly. He let his poison seep through the kingdom drop by drop. I found him in the upper gallery, of course. Leaning on the railing, watching the training yard below, as if he were admiring the view instead of plotting how to stain it with blood. Lady Aveline, he said, turning as if he'd only just noticed me. You look pale. The altitude, perhaps. I'm quite well, I said, even as my stomach churned. Good. His smile was all teeth. One worries, with the blood moon so close. The kingdom needs a queen strong enough to carry its future. I held his gaze. The kingdom needs a king who doesn't rely on gossip to steady his crown. He chuckled. Ah, so you've heard. Courtyards do like to talk. He stepped closer, his tone softening in false sympathy. It isn't your fault, you know. The moon can be cruel, but Roland must think of more than his heart. A mate who cannot give him heirs places us all in difficulty. Us. As if he included me in that us. If he chooses unwisely, Damien continued, eyes glittering, the council has a duty to correct him, for the good of the Pax. And I suppose you'd sacrifice yourself for that duty, I said. If called upon, he murmured, the kingdom cannot be left to fade. He left me there, fingers digging into the railing so hard my nails hurt. His words weren't a threat, they were a promise. That night, I didn't go to Roland's chambers. I paced my own instead, heart hammering, the bond thrumming like a plucked string every time I tried to push it down. The truth was simple and merciless. Damien was right about one thing. I was a weak point in Roland's armor, at least in the eyes of those who thought a king's worth lived in his heirs. If they used me to pry the crown from his head, I'd never forgive myself. So I decided to make the only choice that felt like it belonged to me. I would leave. I waited until dawn's first light crept along the floor, cold and thin. The castle was quiet, the day not yet dressed in noise. I packed quickly, simple dresses, a worn cloak, the small bundle of pressed flower pages Roland and I had made together. My hands shook around them. At the door, the bond pulled hard, like a muscle cramping. I pushed through it and stepped into the corridor. Roland was waiting. He stood just beyond the threshold, hair unbound, eyes dark with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite hurt. He looked as if he'd been there a while. I wondered how long it would take you, he said softly. My throat closed. Move, I whispered. Please. No. His gaze dropped to the bundle in my hand. Taking our memories with you? I clutched it tighter. If I stay, they'll use me to rip your crown away. Damien is already sharpening the knives. If the council challenges your fitness because of me, because of us, he corrected, they can dress it however they like. But what they fear is that I have chosen with my heart instead of their ledger. Exactly, I said. If I walk away now, they have no weapon. You can claim the bond was a mistake, or a moment of madness, or... Aveline. His voice cut through my rising panic. Look at me. I forced my eyes up. The hurt was still there, but it was wrapped around something fiercer. Resolve, maybe even relief. You think leaving saves me, he said. It doesn't. It only proves them right. That fear still rules my decisions. That I care more about a chair and a circlet than the one person who has ever made this place feel like more than stone. You need this throne, I argued. Your people. My people need a leader who knows what love looks like, he said. Not another wolf who sacrifices everything human in him to keep hold of cold metal. I have already lived that life, Aveline. I will not spend the rest of it alone on a higher seat. He stepped closer. I retreated 2 paces before my back hit the wall. You changed me, he went on, voice low, as if he were confessing to a crime. You walked into my life and refused to be impressed by the parts of me everyone else worships. You challenged me. You made me see the villagers behind the reports, the scared girl behind the word Omega, the man behind my own crown. His hand lifted, hovering near my cheek but not touching. Before you, duty was the only language I knew. Then you kissed me in a festival square, and I realized I was starving. Roland. No. His eyes burned into mine. Listen, if I let you walk away to make it easier for them to keep me on that throne, I will spend the rest of my life wondering if I betrayed the only honest thing the moon ever gave me. I would rather lose my kingdom than lose you, and discover I am nothing but my father's shadow after all. The bond throbbed between us, hot and steady, as if agreeing. Tears blurred my vision. I don't want you to lose everything because of me. Then stay, he said. Stand with me when they call the council. Let them see that I am not a boy playing at love, but a man who has chosen his mate and will not be moved. If they strip my crown for that, so be it. I will build something new with the hands that once held a scepter. It's not that easy, I whispered. It is exactly that hard, he replied. But easy has never been promised to us. Silence pressed in. My chest hurt with how much I wanted to believe him, how much I already did. Roland, I said, voice shaking, if they take your throne, if everything falls because of this, I need you to know I never meant to unravel your life. I only meant to survive mine. His expression softened, the ferocity in his gaze folding into something tender. You have not unraveled my life, he said. You have revealed it, and I am finally willing to see what it might be without chains disguised as duty. The words ripped something open in me. All the fear, all the careful distance, all the nights I'd lain awake tracing the shape of him in my mind and biting down on the admission lodged behind my teeth. I love you, I blurted. The hallway seemed to exhale. I tried not to, I rushed on, the tide now unstoppable. It was supposed to be an arrangement, and then a bond we could ignore, and then… You were laughing in your chambers, and bleeding in council, and planting flowers with me in a garden no one else sees, and I… My voice broke. I fell. Completely, stupidly, hopelessly, and it terrified me. A dozen emotions crossed his face in quick succession. Shock, relief, something like wonder. Then he lifted his hands to my face, thumbs catching the tears I hadn't realized were falling. Good, he whispered, because I have been in love with you since the moment you glared at me in that market and told me you hated pretending. I let out a wild, wet laugh. You have terrible timing. So do you, he said. We deserve each other. He kissed me then, not with the careful reverence of the second kiss or the stunned hunger of the first, but with a certainty that left no room for doubt. The bond surged, no longer a pulse or a hum, but a full sweeping tide that wrapped around us and pulled tight. When we broke apart, foreheads resting together, the panic that had driven me toward the door had quieted. The fear was still there, coiled and waiting, but it no longer stood alone. What now? I asked. Now, he said, we stop running from what the moon already wrote. We go to the council together. We let Damien throw his accusations, and we answer them, not as a king clinging to power and an Omega clinging to scraps, but as two wolves who have chosen each other. His hand slid down to mine, fingers interlacing. Whatever comes after, we face it side by side. I looked at our joined hands, at the man who would risk a kingdom rather than let me walk away, and felt the bond settle into place like it had finally found where it belonged. Together then, I said. The blood moon was coming, with all its trials and judgment, but for the first time, destiny didn't feel like a sentence handed down from the heavens. It felt like a path we were choosing to walk, step for terrifying, miraculous step, side by side. The blood moon rose huge and low over the castle, turning every blade and banner the color of fresh spilled wine. The courtyard seethed with bodies, lords in their finest cloaks, warriors in polished mail, villagers packed at the edges, all of them craning to see which story tonight would tell. A king crowned by destiny, or a kingdom snatched by a hungry wolf. I stood at Roland's side on the stone dais, my hand in his. He didn't hide it. Our fingers were laced openly, our joined grip the first declaration. The council ringed us in a half circle. Damien stood directly opposite, clothed in dark red, looking like he'd already tried the throne on in his mind and found it a perfect fit. On the night of the blood moon, he called, voice smooth as oil, the king must stand with the mate fated to carry the future of the packs. We are told this Omega cannot bear children. How then can she be the moon's choice? How can a king who chooses barrenness claim to guard our legacy? A murmur rippled through the crowd. The words landed like blows, even though I'd heard them 100 times in whispers. Hearing them shouted to the sky made my stomach twist. Roland's hand tightened around mine. He stepped forward, shoulders squared, head high. When he spoke, his voice carried to the farthest edges of the courtyard. You speak as if the moon is a midwife, he said, as if her only work is counting how many children we can stack on a keep's wall. You forget what she truly rules." He lifted our joined hands. "Bond, oath, soul." Damien's smile thinned. "Fine words, but we are not here for speeches, cousin. We are here for proof." "The bond is proof," Roland answered. "You feel it now, all of you. The air thick with it. You have watched us these past weeks, seen us side by side in council, in court, in the village. Have you ever seen me more myself than when she stands near?" His gaze swept the crowd. Faces shifted, some uncertain, some grudging, some strangely moved. "Still," he went on, "you want a sign you cannot argue with. So be it. Let the moon judge me. If I stand here tonight with a mate not of her choosing, let her strip from me everything I hold." Gasps hissed through the courtyard. Corin, at the foot of the dais, went pale. Damien's eyes flashed triumph. "Brave," Damien said. "Or foolish. We shall see which." The priests stepped forward, their white robes glowing pink in the blood-tinged light. One carried a silver bowl, another a ceremonial blade, its edge engraved with runes older than any crown. Roland turned to me then, and for a heartbeat the kingdom vanished. It was just us, as it had been in gardens and corridors and stolen midnights. "If at any point you wish to walk away," he said quietly, "say it. I will stand by that word as firmly as I stand by this choice." My throat tightened. "And if I wish to stay?" He smiled, the real one, the one that reached his eyes and softened every line of his face. "Then let them watch." The priest pricked his palm first, then mine. Warm blood welled. We held our hands over the bowl, red drops falling in tandem, swirling together until you couldn't tell which belonged to whom. "Under the gaze of the blood moon," the priest intoned, "we call upon the goddess who binds soul to soul. If this union is false, let the bond wither. If it is true, let it be seen." The courtyard held its breath. A wind rose, sudden and cold, whipping cloaks and banners. The torches guttered. For a terrifying second, everything went dark. Then light erupted. Not from the sky, but from our joined hands. Silver poured out of our skin like liquid moonlight, a glowing thread spiraling upwards. It wrapped around my wrist, then Roland's, coiling up our arms in bright rings before leaping higher, shooting into the crimson-stained sky. The blood moon caught it and answered. Light fell back on us in a shimmering veil, settling over our shoulders, our hearts. Gasps turned to cries. Some wolves dropped to their knees, heads bowed. The bond inside me blazed, no longer a hidden current, but a sun flaring to life. I felt Roland's soul as clearly as I felt my own, steady, scarred, fierce, reaching for me with a joy that stole my breath. All the doubts I'd clung to, all the whispered not enoughs, burned away in that glow. Damien staggered back a step, his face gone ashen. "Tricks," he spat. "Some priest's spell." The silver thread snapped toward him like a striking snake, stopping a hair's breadth from his chest. The air around him shuddered, rejecting him, then relaxed as the light recoiled, returning to us. The message was clear. "The moon has spoken," one of the elder counselors said hoarsely. "She has marked them." Roland turned, still haloed in faint silver, and faced Damien. "My mate," he said, voice ringing with something more than authority now. "Chosen by the goddess you claim to serve. Do you still wish to challenge?" Damien's jaw worked. He looked from the glowing traces on our skin to the faces around him, wolves whose eyes now held something like awe. He saw the shift in the wind. Slowly he bowed, not to me. To Roland, yes, but also to the bond neither of them could deny. "For now," he said through gritted teeth, "I yield." He stepped back into the crowd. The threat didn't vanish, but it dimmed, shoved to the edges of the story the moon had just written in light. Roland turned to me again. The silver glow was fading, sinking beneath his skin, but I could still feel it humming, a shared heartbeat. "In front of all of them," he said softly, "I will say this plainly. Aveline of Thornwick, you are my mate, not by decree, not by arrangement, by fate. My eyes stung. And you, I answered, louder than I'd meant to, are mine. He went to one knee, not as a king subdued, but as a man offering everything he was. The crowd erupted in noise, but it sounded far away. Walk beside me, he said, as my queen, as my equal, as the one person who can drag me back from the edge when duty tries to swallow me whole. My laugh came out tangled with a sob. Someone has to make sure you don't trip over legacy stones. He grinned up at me, eyes bright. Is that a yes? Yes, I said, the word ringing like a bell through bond and bone. He rose and pulled me close, kissing me under the bleeding sky. This kiss was not for show, not for rebellion, not even for reassurance. It was an answer. Around us, wolves howled, a wild chorus rising to meet the moon. The bond thrummed, settled, rooted itself so deep I knew there was no tearing it free without destroying us both. 2 wounded souls, 2 battered hearts, 2 lives that had been shaped by other people's expectations, standing in the open at last, chosen by something older and higher than any council. Under the crimson gaze of the blood moon, we were no longer bargaining with destiny. We were living it. So tell me, where are you watching from, and what is your favorite moment in this story? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.